even if then later you print with yellow or green or something, then you can adjust your inks accordingly, but this will tell you exactly like how your plate is looking. And here's the tough part. You've got to kind of bundle this all up like in a wad, but then you want to try to like pull it on itself so that it's as smooth as possible. So it's like a powder puff, or it's like a powder puff. I don't know what else to call it. So what we're going to do here is push and kind of twist, and it's going to do two things for us. It's going to distribute the ink across the plate to give us a nice plate tone, but it's also going to further push the ink into the grooves. And so this is why a dirty tarlatan is even better than a clean tarlatan, because it's really going to help us push the ink into the grooves. And because this was clean, it went pretty quickly. Now, I'm going to open this up and just find a clean area and do the same thing. Wad it back, kind of pull it tight. But you can imagine this is different than just crumpled up, because crumpled up it's going to have a bunch of nooks and crannies, a lot more surface area, and it might overwipe your plate. So now what I'm going to do is just very lightly, just like stones across a pond, skim the surface. I'm just barely using any pressure, barely holding onto the plate, just kind of taking a little bit more of the excess off, but trying my best, and this is why it might take some practice, not to push down, because if you push down, you're going to pull the ink out of all those little lines. But you get to about this point, keeping in mind that, I think you're ready for almost ready for tarlatan. There's also ink on the back, so it's, because we can see through it, mine's going to look dirtier than the metal plate. Now I'm going to take some paper from the phone book, but if you notice, let's just ask for your powers of observation for a moment. If I open up this phone book, I tear some sheets out, what's the difference between the sheet I tore out and the sheets that I'm holding in my hand? The hint is in the middle. Clean cut?
Yeah.
That's it. Take the extra time to go over to the paper cutter and cut the ragged edge off, because all those little paper fibers will leave little trails in your ink and can be very frustrating. So I always tear them out, cut some off, and then here's the hard part to explain. You won't understand it until you try it yourself. I think we all understand when I say we don't want to use too much pressure, that we don't want to pull the ink out of the lines. So if we're looking at this plate, across, the ink is inside the plate, we want to just polish the surface. So you have to try your best to use the paper with as little pressure as possible, almost just like your fingertips, but you probably need a little bit more of your hand at work. And it takes some practice. It might take a little bit of sweat on your hand, or maybe even some ink to get a little stickiness, but I'm just barely pushing this. So I'm not muscling it. In fact, if I could probably hold this with 2 fingers, and it's staying, I'm just using enough pressure to kind of hold it in place. And what the paper is doing is it's polishing the plate and just taking little bits off. And so, a little bit more. Now go to the clean part and twist it a little bit more, and then you can go to paper. All right. This is looking pretty good. It's not going to look as clean as it did before you started, partially because I have ink on the back. You might have to switch to another sheet of paper, and you can overwipe it. So you have to kind of, just like with the relief, and some of you were counting how many brayer rolls you did on your lino block or which direction, you might come up with like a little recipe for yourself, like 2 times with the tarlatan, twice with the paper, and then your corners. So especially for those of you who have beveled edges, take your plate, make sure your corner is clean, because this could squish out and affect your print. And now, I'm okay with all the ink on the back because there's no big globs. This one back here is a little thick and it could squirt out, so I'm gonna just maybe kind of just take that. But if I put it now face down and I start trying to clean the back, I run the risk of pushing the ink out of the lines. And the way Intaglio really works is truly, you're taking your dampened paper and you're pushing it into the lines, and it's picking up the ink and pulling it out. So that's why we're using so much pressure with the Intaglio plate. So now I'm taking my gloves off, my hands are pretty clean. A little bit more. Now, yeah, go to a clean paper, and so you should be able to get all that sort of look off. And tell you what, let's, by the way, have a garbage can nearby, because you're gonna go through a lot of this paper. So, I've got blotter paper here. And notice with the step guide that I gave you, it talks about on step 2, mixing the ink with Easy Wipe. Water-based ink, we don't have to. So it's just ready to go. So now we've inked the plate, right? Everybody's clear? We've wiped the plate. Now we got to talk about printing it. So I've got blotter paper here. The blotter paper is your own. You bought some. But it kind of becomes communal because we get stacks of them. If you really don't want to share, or you're worried because someone else is really messy and you're very clean, then just be vocal and be like, hey guys, this is my blotter paper. No, nobody will have hurt feelings. So you come over here, you gotta be real careful. Down, and a little bit of too much information. I hate the feeling of your paper. So we're gonna, the plastic is really thin, so I think I'm gonna go just about to the bottom, till it bottoms out. On the little presses, I would say the sticker says 3, I think 2.5. Now, if you're pushing down on the felts, it's going to get harder to turn. So you might have to take the felts out first, and then so that's bottomed out. No way those felts are going to go through. So I'm going to maybe go like a full turn back and try that. This is just a proof. We've got a little bit of chaos here. Jason, or Kelly, would you grab me a couple of clean sheets of newsprint out of the newsprint board, please? All right. So, we still use a stencil, just like we did with relief, so you can map out where your plate is, so you know exactly how to register it each time, and then that way you have even borders each time, and if later you want to try color, you can start registering your plates. I'm going to go ahead and fold this in half just because I'll be able to use this as a top sheet too. Especially with your clear plate, make sure it's ink side up, right? Because if it's clear, you might have accidentally set it upside down or something. Make sure your hands are pretty clean. Take your paper, which you've initialed on the back, so you know that's the back. Set it down. And depending on how much ink you have, like if you have large areas of black, like that snake here, or maybe even the frog, you might need 2 sheets of paper. Because it's a lot of ink that's pushing through wet paper. So I think we're pretty good here. Sizing catcher goes first. Cushion blanket is most important. That's the thick one in the middle. Catcher or pusher on top, because that's the one that gives a little bit of traction. And let's see what happens. Drum roll. Now, some of you experimented with going both ways through the press with your linoleum. It definitely won't work with etching because we're now going at about 2,500 psi and it's pulling and stretching the paper. So if you imagine it's pulled and stretched the paper one way, if we go back the other way, 9 times out of 10, it's going to blur the image because it's going to pull and stretch and smear. So there's my tapping that I always do.
Nice.
All right.
Beautiful.
So, a couple things to talk about.
That's beautiful.
Look at how black you can get just with cross-hatching. So this, the only part I sanded was actually here and it barely shows. So that shows I need to sand more, steel wool more. This is dirty wiping. So this is where I was too rushed and I might want to clean that off because then it won't be consistent. The goal is to make these look pretty consistent. But it's showing that the level of detail you can get just with scratching on there.
You should definitely scratch the corners the same,
because the vignetting really works.
You like that?
Especially with the subject matter.
Yeah. So then take it to your drying rack or whatever and just set it down. And then remember, the drying racks are great for drying your prints but not storing them. So I would say as soon as they feel pretty good, little paper peachies made out of newsprint, maybe put them in your drawers even if they're not totally dry. And then we can sign them later. So let's see, is Kelly's ready?
I think so.
All right, so I'm gonna just move mine off. And since this is a communal shop, you know, I would suggest moving your stuff right away. But if someone's plate is left on the press, you know, just ask, can I move your plate? If the answer is no, that means maybe they're right in the middle of, you know, getting ready to pull their impression. Now, here's the added part for Kelly's plate. Since I had small pieces of paper ready to go for mine, hers is larger, right? So if you're using printer paper or even newsprint, this will dissolve in the water. So what we want to do now is actually start, if you're proofing, just with a dry sheet, and come over and just soak both sides, but just quickly, and newsprint will start to disintegrate right away. So you gotta, maybe even mist it. We have some spray bottles, maybe mist it for some newsprint, and then bring it over. Don't slip on. So Kelly, why don't you put a clean sheet of newsprint down and put your plate on top.
This is everything newsprint.
That one right there. You can just take that print off of it.
I think it's too big now. I think it's too big to fold it over and use.
Yeah, so we'll get another one, but you can put your plate on there right now.
Okay.
Thank you. And then since we're eyeballing it at first, you know, it's just a proof, just sort of eyeball, put it down. I wouldn't try to set this down.
What about the thickness?
I think it's good.
You think so?
I think it's good because mine was a little too loose, so.
It's not even though.
Yeah, there's not much we can do about that at this point. Yeah, all right, so,
Is that the right way?
I don't know, let's find out.
Yeah, it's the right way.
All right. You don't have to use the big one, the little ones work just as well.
Yeah, that
It
big
is.
wheel just something cathartic
He sees
about that.
he's rooting for the middle ones too.
Well, I am, but in case you're like,
Yeah.
I need to get my print done. Well, there's two other ones that work just as well.
Yeah.
Now the other thing is, and I haven't seen anybody do it yet, but we have larger felts over there. By the way, they're immaculate, so don't be the one who prints their plate with
Family prints.
no paper.
Claiming it as.
Right. You could potentially run two at a time. Like have a jig made, you know, like white, put them both down, papers down, run them both through at the same time. That's certain. Kelly, would you do the honors? And then remember, let's save this, but don't reuse this, because those wrinkles will show. All those wrinkles will show. Let's see. Ooh. Well, you hold it. It's your print.
Oh, I like it.
So, nice. So now the question is, I know you stopped out some white areas. So what that tells me, since I know there's some shiny parts on the plate, it's probably a good practice print, but I bet you could wipe a little bit more. Now, what it does show me is you got some very rich grays, right? So, pretty darn nice.
Great variety of textures.
Now, a couple words of warning. Great, thank you for that. Great textures, great variety. Remember, we talked about that as being part of this project. Try to get some different textures, some different feelings. A couple things to think about. The cheap paper or your newsprint, it's made for printing. I mean, it's made for newspapers. That's why it's called newsprint. It holds the ink sometimes better than even the cotton rag paper. So that's something to keep in mind. It might be then you wiped it, you came up with a recipe, 2 pieces of paper, 2 passes of the tarlatan, and then you print it on your good paper, and it doesn't look so great. Maybe that means more ink, more pressure, more time to soak. But then keep a couple things in mind. Look at that beautiful embossment on the back. So that's what makes an etching really lovely, is you see the plate mark. This is why we battled our plates, because we don't want it to punch through the paper, punch through the felts. Perfectly printed, Kelly, great job. Beautiful. So, questions. I got two more things to show you, and then